past month, Bruce Willis tragically announced that he's retiring from acting due to health issues. Now, Bruce Willis has an absolute Hall of Fame filmography where he has starred in movies of multiple genres that are all fantastic. And for me personally, he has like 5 movies that are in my top 50 favorite movies of all time. So this seemed like the perfect time to stop and celebrate his filmography and share my top 10 favorite Bruce Willis films. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your top 10 favorite Bruce Willis films. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, my buddy Cody Leach similarly did a video with his top 10 Bruce Willis films. You can check that out right up here once you've watched this video, and let's get started. Number 10, The Last Boy Scout. Now, this is a movie that I only watched for the first time within the last few years, and it was a bit like finding a buried treasure because this movie has so many things about it that I love. It's an early 90s action thriller. Love that era of action films. Directed by Tony Scott. I'm a big fan of Tony Scott. The script is from Shane Black, who is like the master of this type of film. And then add into that, it's a Bruce Willis buddy film with Damon Wayans, and so it's just a lot of fun. From there, you also have a young Halle Berry thrown into the mix, Danielle Harris, right after being in the Halloween films. And so just a bunch of stuff that I love in a film that somehow I hadn't seen. So you've got cool action because it's from Tony Scott. You've got great dialogue and banter because of the 2 leads are fun, charismatic dudes with Shane Black writing for them.
That was a bomb? That had a hell of a factory recall.
Put it all together, a solid action thriller. Number 9, 12 Monkeys. Now, if you haven't seen this film, basically it's set in the future where a deadly virus has wiped out most of humanity, and Bruce Willis is selected for an experiment to send him back in time to try and figure out what caused this virus to spread so perhaps they can save humanity. And it's this trippy film directed by Terry Gilliam, who has this very odd visual style to it that makes it trippy. You've got Brad Pitt giving one of the weirdest and most fun performances he's ever done.
I'm not saying you're not mentally ill. For all I know, you're crazy as a loon.
And then just at its core, it's a great sci-fi time travel thriller where you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on while this guy's desperately on this mission to maybe save humanity. And all leading up to a great kind of final twist reveal and what happens. You see certain visuals and stuff and how it kind of all starts to tie together. So just a movie that when you get to the payoff, get the final reveals, it's heartbreaking, it's tragic, but all at the same time, it makes sense. And so just a really well put together film. Number 8, The Whole Nine Yards. Now, this is a comedy that pairs Bruce Willis with Matthew Perry at the peak of Friends fame. And it's just a fun, nice comedy with a great supporting cast. The basic premise is basically Bruce Willis is this hitman that moves into the suburbs, and when Matthew Perry and his wife realize that he's there, all sorts of hijinks ensue because of this. And there's all these layers to the plot where it's convoluted, but the fun kind of convoluted.
You were right about him. This is one exceedingly sweet man.
All the actors are having a lot of fun playing these very lively characters, and it's just nice to see Bruce Willis in kind of a straight comedy type of role that's designed for adults. It's not like he's done a lot of kids movies. It's not one of those. It's like an R-rated comedy that fires on a lot of cylinders, and it's just nice, watchable film. Next up, Armageddon. I call movies like this Taco Bell movies. They are the fast food of cinema. You know that they're not cinematic fine dining, but you love to eat them anyway. And Armageddon is one of my favorite Taco Bell movies. It came out when I was in high school, and I had an absolute blast with it at the time. And here we are almost 25 years later, and I still have a lot of fun with this movie. The premise about a bunch of oil drillers being sent into space makes absolutely no sense, and that's kind of the fun of the movie. It takes a ludicrous premise and just goes for it.
The United States government just asked us to save the world. Anybody want to say no?
You think we'll get hazard pay out of this?
Add to that, the cast here is pretty phenomenal, whether you're talking about up-and-coming actors like Ben Affleck and Owen Wilson, or some like strong dramatic actors thrown into the mix, Bruce Willis in the lead of the whole thing. I mean, just everyone is a solid actor. And then you throw in Michael Bay, who, when you give him a silly premise and say, go wild and crazy and do your visual flair with it, that's what he does really well. And then add to it, it does just enough emotional manipulation as you get into the final act of the film. So it even has some nice heartbreaking moments towards the end. So it can be funny, it's got big, gigantic action, it's got a little bit of certainly manipulative heart, but manipulative heart nonetheless. Number 6, Looper, Rian Johnson's time travel hitman film where Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt face off against each other as the same character, as Joseph Gordon-Levitt is supposed to be young Bruce Willis. And it's just a really smart science fiction hitman film that thinks through the time travel mechanics, builds out this whole mythology of the rules of this world, and then does this little character study about this hitman that realizes how awful some of like what they're doing can be, and grows all along the way. Throw Emily Blunt into the mix, and you kind of flesh out the cast. There's actually several solid actors in this film, as is the case with most of the films on this list. And there's some truly horrifying sequences in this film. One in particular, where there's a guy who's being tortured in the past, and you see him, his body, the old version of him, as limbs are like falling off, and you could almost see the premise of a horror film. It's like a mini horror film in this one scene where Rian Johnson, though I might not be crazy about what he did with Star Wars, really has some directing chops, and you see it in this film. In 5th place, Die Hard with a Vengeance. The third Die Hard film teams up John McClane with Zeus, Samuel L. Jackson, and it was exactly what this franchise needed to make things fresh and new again. At its core, the movie is based off a spec script from Jonathan Hensley called Simon Says.
I want to play a game with Lieutenant McClane.
What kind of game?
Simon Says.
That just had this clever idea about this pair of people trying to have to battle all these tricks while this guy's giving them orders over the phone, and they converted it into a Die Hard film, and it fit the franchise really nicely, as John McClane is one of the most famous New York City cops in all of cinematic history, and in the rest of the Die Hard films, he's not in New York City. This one makes New York City a character in the film and puts the cop with the common man on this adventure. The two leads have amazing chemistry. Our villain is a great follow-up to Hans Gruber from the original film. I think it does lose a little bit of steam in the final act. They didn't know exactly how to land the plane, but other than that, a great addition to the Die Hard franchise. In 4th place, The Sixth Sense, Bruce Willis's first team up with M. Night Shyamalan, and this is just a fantastic thriller that works on so many different levels. Now, the movie, of course, is famous for its big plot twist. And in case you're the one person that hasn't seen the movie yet or hasn't had it spoiled for you yet, I'm not going to explain what that is, but it's famous for its big plot twist. I guess multiple plot twists. And some people have argued it's a one-trick pony. You can watch it one time and it's not nearly as interesting if you watch it a second time. I think that's entirely false. It is a movie that has one of the top 5 greatest plot twists of all time, but it's also just a fantastic character study, where when you watch it a second time, you interpret everything differently. It works entirely when you watch it under your understanding the initial time, and then when you rewatch it with the knowledge of everything that's really going on, it informs so much more, and everything has a second interpretation, and it's fulfilling on a different level. And you can watch it a third time and just pay attention to the journey, the arc of our different characters, and every time you watch it, you pick up on new and different details. I have no clue why M. Night Shyamalan was so good, so focused on the little details at this point in time in his career, and he lost that for so many of his projects moving forward. But this is just a phenomenal little film that has so much depth and so many layers to it, and it's so well thought out. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your list down below in the comment section. My list isn't the right list, just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, remember my buddy Cody Leach put out his list actually yesterday. You can check that out right up here when this video's over. In third place, Unbreakable, and this is a movie that I just absolutely love. Obviously, I'm a big fan of comic book movies, and this movie was very much ahead of its time because this is before the genre as we know it really exploded, and M. Night Shyamalan, who's just a lover of comic books, decided to make his own superhero comic book story that's just soaked in comic book movie mythology and understanding while setting it in a grounded reality where everything else in the universe is normal. It plays out like day-to-day experiences where people have marital struggles. But in this world, there's also people with incredible powers, and it plays that out. Just felt like it was 10 years ahead of its time when this movie came out. And for me, this is the best of M. Night Shyamalan's films that I love stories of becoming, where you just see someone on this journey, and this is a great, great origin story of becoming as you watch this very broken man who in fact is unbreakable. And he slowly realizes that, and that's what reignites him as a husband, as a father, that pulls his family together as he understands who he is. And once again, as you get the final twist reveal that causes you to reinterpret everything you've seen up to that point in time and adds like this emotional punch to it just because of how good Samuel L. Jackson is. It's so, like, Samuel L. Jackson is one of these guys that because he's so known for playing Samuel L. Jackson in so many movies and having the big personality and all the charisma, you can forget that he is a world-class actor. And whenever he chooses to, whenever he wants to do a real acting role, he transforms and disappears, and all the swagger disappears, and all you see is that character. And this is one of those films where he's just this other guy, that he's not doing all the usual bag of tricks that makes him so fun to watch. And he can be heartbreaking, as you see in the final scene of this movie. Some people find the end anticlimactic, and I understand why you would feel that. I get where people are coming from. I would just totally disagree with you. I think that this is an amazing film. Our runner-up, Pulp Fiction, the movie that really put Tarantino on the map. Reservoir Dogs was like an indie hit, and then he did Pulp Fiction, and though it was an indie film, it made bukus of money and made him one of the hottest directors of the last 30 years. And one of the segments in the film stars Bruce Willis. And the thing about this movie that's so fascinating to me is that on so many different levels, it breaks all the rules of the way that I normally enjoy films, the way that I normally like character arcs, plots to be structured. Tarantino takes that, throws it all out, and finds a way to make a compelling story with characters you love to spend time with, but at the same time, doesn't follow any of the normal rules, certainly not the ones that apply to the way I normally evaluate films, and tells this compelling story. And every one of the segments is filled with quotable little bits. Every single one of them has memorable bits. And in particular, when you get into the Bruce Willis segment, you get in with the GIMP and all these other things, these quotes from Ving Rhames that I won't repeat on my channel. All of it has become part of the lexicon of language that everybody knows, and it goes back to Pulp Fiction and that amazing script that he wrote, the amazing cast that he assembled, and Bruce Willis, of course, being one of those people. But coming in at number 1 is Die Hard. For me, if you strip away subgenres like sci-fi, this is the absolute best action film of all time, and it's one of my absolute favorite films of all time. Actually, for that matter, all the movies in my top 4 are some of my absolute favorite films of all time. But I think that this is just a perfectly crafted action thriller where everything that happens in the first 10-15 minutes matters later on in the film. There's no superfluous details. There's no wasted lines of dialogue. Everything is setting up the scenario, some conflict later in the film. All of it pays off because it's so well thought out. It's so well crafted. Add to that just a phenomenal cast. Bruce Willis just does such a great job of being a totally convincing, lousy husband that does care about his wife, but he's not very good at that, as well as being the action hero, but not coming off like the action hero. He does not at all feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger in all of his movies. He feels like the everyman, just a cop that has the skills to overcome this scenario, but he doesn't want to be there. He's that reluctant hero. Of course, Alan Rickman is Hans Gruber, one of the best movie villains of all time. Where on paper, he's a typical guy that has the facade of what he's doing, but he's really just committing a heist. But he's so good, has so much charisma, swagger, that he elevates this character to this next level. And there's all of these familiar character actors, familiar faces throughout the whole cast of this film. So everything about it is just perfect. The movie they were trying to make, they perfectly nailed it. So absolutely love this film, one of the most rewatchable films of all time. So it comes in at number 1. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, you can check out my buddy Cody's video right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.